For today's lecture, we will be looking at Part 3 of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles and Wilson's downfall. At the end of the war, Wilson is seen as a hero by most. He will, however, begin to lose credibility when the Republicans are going to be able to winning a lot of votes in the U.S. There becomes a rivalry between Wilson and Henry Cabot Lodge. Wilson will meet with the Big Four in Paris, which includes the leaders of U.S., Great Britain, Italy, and France. At that conference, they will essentially discuss the terms for surrender, which will end up becoming the Treaty of Versailles. Compromises within the treaty, basically the losers will lose their colonial holdings, and they will essentially be controlled from here on out by the League of Nations. And however, the League of Nations is not included as a part of the Treaty of Versailles itself. The final treaty will have to work out compromises with both France, Italy, and Japan over colonized land. Germany will be forced to accept a peace that they did not participate in. Only about 4 of 23 principles of Wilson's 14 points will be involved in the final Treaty of Versailles. Throughout the Treaty of Versailles, Germany is punished extremely harshly. They're going to be forced to give up a ton of land. They're forced to give up their colonies. On top of all that, they are forced to pay back what's called war reparations, which essentially means wherever countries experience fighting and damage, whether it be physically or economically, Germany is going to have to make payments to those countries to help them rebuild, while at the same time having to rebuild their own nation. Wilson had been forced out of this final compromise of moral peace so that he could keep the League of Nations in check. However, the League, again, it's only there for a short amount of time before it essentially fails, again, because the U.S. is not a part of the League of Nations. Some of the good points of the Treaty of Versailles is that a lot of minority people groups are going to be liberated and able to declare their own nations and governments. Wilson will fight for the treaty, although there are a lot of critics. A lot of people believe that the Treaty of Versailles is too harsh, while others believe that it is way too lenient in punishment. Isolationists hate the idea of a League of Nations. Over Lodge's filibuster, Wilson went on a desperate speech-making tour to sell the treaty to the public. However, he eventually would have a stroke, and soon after that, death will come for him as he leaves office. With Henry Cabot Lodge now essentially in charge of things, there are a lot of reservations that he has. He makes a deal where the Republicans would only accept the treaty with some reservations, especially in reserving the rights of the U.S. under the Monroe Doctrine and U.S. sovereignty. Wilson will urge the Democrats to reject the treaty with reservations, and in doing so, the treaty on the U.S. side is eventually killed. In the election of 1920, Wilson wants to make peace through the campaign with a referendum on the League. Republican Harding will win the election, however, with the promise of returning to normalcy. Some key things that help him out in the election is the women's vote, which, as you know, they gained their right to suffrage, I believe, in 1920. And eventually, this will be a death sentence for the League of Nations, as once Harding is involved in the presidency, we completely back out eventually of the League of Nations. So key legacies of the war and the peace. First of all, the weakened League meant that the world was unable to deal with tensions after World War I, which will eventually slingshot the world into another war, World War II. The U.S. hurt itself by remaining as isolationists when it needed to take a global responsibility in leadership during World War I and through the Treaty of Versailles. We are therefore somewhat to blame for the problems between World War I and those that built up to eventually lead to World War II. The idea of Wilsonianism is that American intervention must take place and that the U.S. should spread our ideas of democracy and capitalism, and that American influence overall could bring peace to the world. Now, there's a big question mark next to this ideal in terms of, is this a realistic stream of thought, or is this just simply a group of people thinking that they're better than what they actually are? Is this more of an idealistic way of thought or something that can truly be? Stay tuned and you'll soon see. So here are just a few questions that sum up some of the overall lecture sections. Question 1, with the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the great majority of Americans A, earnestly hoped to stay out of the war, B, favored entering the war in support of the Allies, C, supported the Central Powers, D, wanted to form a military alliance of neutral nations, or E, favored U.S. mediation of the conflict. If you picked A, earnestly hope to stay out of the war, that is the better of the 5 choices. Question number 2. The U.S. declared war on Germany, A, in response to demands of American munition makers, B, as a result of treaty obligations, C, because Wall Street bankers demanded it, D, after Mexico signed an alliance with Germany, or E, after German U-boats sank 4 unarmed American merchant vessels. If you chose E, after German U-boats sank 4 unarmed American merchant vessels, you are correct. And last question. During World War I, the government's treatment of labor could best be described as A, fair, B, strict and financially unrewarding, C, extremely brutal, D, so good the right to form unions was finally granted, or E, decent for Native Americans but harsh for ethnic groups. For this question, remember to think back of those political cartoons in showing the dealings between labor and the government. If you picked C, extremely brutal, you have chosen correctly. That's our time for World War I, and stay tuned for more sessions on the 1920s.